Okay, so my name is Kim Porter. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're here. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Be a Part of the Conversation. I love tonight's topic. I'm so glad that we get to do this. A little bit more information about some resources that you'll have in just a little bit regarding this topic. But I want to thank our community partner who is sponsoring this program. This is the Chester County Office of Drug and Alcohol Services. We've been partnering with them for a number of years now, and we're so very grateful. So thank you very much to Chester County. You do not have to be from Chester County, PA to be on this program. Please visit our website for more information. I'm going to actually share this page with you. This is conversation.zone/sibling. So hang on a second. I'm going to stop sharing and going to get back in and share and just show you this page on our website. Okay, so this is our siblings page. It's conversation.zone/siblings, and I'll put this and other links in the chat in just a moment. But I wanted to point this out to you because there are a couple of resources that I want you to know about. So tonight's program, once it's recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, will be visible here. You can't access it yet because we're just getting started. But here are a couple of other past programs that are related. And also, we have lots of resources down here, and included among these resources are support meetings for siblings. So this is for a sibling over the age of 18 who is interested in attending a meeting that is just a lot of siblings who've been impacted by addiction. This is currently being hosted by Caron Treatment Center. It takes place on the third Wednesday of every month from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern time. I should add Eastern time there. And what I want to let you know is that we are very grateful to Mallory Henry, who's actually on this program tonight as well as a guest. And Mallory, feel free to jump in at any point because you are also an expert in this area. Mallory has been facilitating this meeting for many years and we just met recently and talked about we want to be of more service to siblings. So we recognize and we agree that a weekly meeting would be more beneficial. So starting in September, our hope is to transfer this meeting over to Be a Part of the Conversation. I believe we'll be calling it Sibling Partnership because we also have parent partnership meetings, and it will stay at the same time, but it will be weekly. So that is the goal. I believe we're going to get there. I don't see any big issues, but I'm so grateful to Mallory and others who have been so supportive through the years of this group. And we have other resources as well, and details about presenters and all of that. So going into the future, we'll have many more programs posted on our calendar. We also, like we're doing tonight, we have a lot of programs recorded. We are up to almost 200 that are on our YouTube channel. Please check that out. There's a lot of great stuff on there, great ways to take a deeper dive into some of the specific topics that we address. I also like to make sure that you all know about parent partnership meetings. We're talking about siblings tonight, but I suspect that there are a lot of folks on here who are like me, who are parents of someone with a substance use disorder and related behavioral health challenges. We need each other, and we have Al-Anon and Nar-Anon meetings, which are great. This is a supplement to those because we are all parents in that shared lived experience. We have 19 meetings every week. About half of them take place on Zoom. Those are the green buttons on this calendar, and about half take place in person. Those are the purple buttons. All you do is click on one of these buttons and you'll get the details. You don't have to register, totally free to attend. And as you can see, we have 5 days a week covered, 19 meetings a week. We also have 3 nights a week that we have Zoom meetings just for parents of teens and young adults. So hope you'll consider taking that in as a resource to help you. Also for family members, specifically parents, we have a 3-part course that's called the Family Recovery Course. And this is, again, totally free to attend. It's co-led by 2 instructors. I'm one of 18 instructors. We've all had that lived experience. You get a manual. It's incredibly helpful. And we're just really proud of some of the feedback that we've been getting with a really great, like 93% retention rate. People stay with it, complete all 3 parts of the course, and they become part of the family. So hope you'll join us if that is something that might speak to you. So I'm excited to tell you about the clinician who's joining us tonight. We're also going to hear from a sibling who has lived experience. But first, let me tell you about Maddie Amrat. She's a clinician with Ethos Treatment and is a licensed clinical social worker. She has worked in the inpatient mental health setting at Jefferson Health and providing individual and group therapy at the University of Pennsylvania's Counseling Center. Maddie's keen interest in understanding how the family system and intergenerational trauma influence the mind and body shapes her approach to substance use disorders and mental health treatment. Maddie's clinical focus revolves around a psychodynamic and relational framework. So, Maddie, the floor is yours. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Kim. I'm just gonna pull up my presentation. So hopefully I can figure this out. I'm a therapist. I'm not into tech stuff, so I don't really know how to do this. But okay, so everyone, my name is Maddie. I'm gonna share a little bit about my experience being the sibling of someone that has struggled with addiction, and has struggled with his mental health. And I really like this picture because this is a picture of me and my brother. And it sort of shows, because he's younger than me, I'm kind of holding his head and trying to sort of steer him in the right direction. I think that being a sibling of someone has struggled with addiction, some of you might relate to the experience of wanting your sibling to maybe shift their path a little bit or make some different decisions. So I think it's sort of like a symbol, or metaphorically, like I always say, this picture shows me trying to steer his head in the right direction. But of course, I don't have control over that. So I'll share a little bit about me. My name is Maddie. I grew up in Wayne, so I grew up in the area of Wayne, Pennsylvania. I have an older sister and a little brother, so I'm the middle child. I attended Conestoga High School, so I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with that, but just to give some context into sort of where I grew up, what my experience was like. I love the beach. I love music festivals. I love music. Um, my current job is I'm a therapist for adolescents, so I work with teenagers. And I work with teenagers who struggle with their mental health and with substance use. So pretty familiar with substance use from the clinical perspective as well as the personal perspective in my life. And I think I like to add this context because I grew up with a pretty normal life. My parents were married. I grew up in a pretty well-resourced area, if anything, an overly resourced area. And so I remember learning about addiction when I was maybe like 12 years old in middle school, or maybe in early high school, and learning about maybe the experience of someone who has addiction struggles, or learning about drugs or substances, and just thinking to myself, I don't really understand what this means. I can never imagine having the experience of this affecting my life. So I always like to give that context in the way that, like, obviously addiction can touch any family or any person, no matter what their circumstances are. And so Mallory, I remember I wanted to share this poem because Mallory shared it last year when we were presenting about the experience of siblings. And I just think I wanted to share it again because even having it read aloud just really made me feel seen as the sibling of someone who struggles with addiction. So really quickly, I'm just going to read the poem before I share a little bit more about my experience. Um, and the author of the poem is unknown, but I'll share. I think an ambulance just went by. If you can hear that, I apologize. So the poem is: I am the other child, the okay one. I am the sober child, the one on the sidelines. I am the observer, the one watching him slowly killing our parents. I am the angry one, the one who's pissed because he's destroying our family. I am the sad one, the one losing her first best friend. I am the reassuring one, the one holding her mama as she cries. I am the torn one, the broken one, trying to hold everyone together. I am the confused one, the one who wonders how we became so unimportant and invisible. I am the other child, the okay one. So I feel like this poem just sort of perfectly describes the experience of being the sibling of someone who has struggled with addiction, and how I feel sometimes people refer to siblings of those who have struggled with addiction as sort of like the invisible ones, because in a lot of traditional treatment centers or treatment processes, there's a lot of focus on parents and there's a lot of focus on the child who's struggling, or the adult who's struggling, but it's often the siblings that aren't really thought of. So when I heard this poem for the first time, I felt like, wow, I think someone else might understand what I've been through. So I just wanted to share that. So I share another picture of me and my little brother. Uh, my brother, like I said, we came from a pretty traditional family. Like my mom stayed at home, my dad worked. Uh, I don't really ever remember like having a lot of stress as a child, but when I was my brother was around 15 years old, he started struggling with his mental health, and struggling with substance use, where um a young, I guess, an adolescent young boy who was typically pretty happy and had a lot of friends and did pretty well in school and was very motivated by different things in his life, he really just started to spiral, and he completely changed. His personality really shifted. He um he kind of just became someone who I didn't really recognize. And when he was 16 years old, so he was a sophomore at Conestoga High School, he went to a wilderness program in Utah because he was struggling to function so much. And looking back on this moment, I think it really was obviously the beginning of his struggle with addiction, but it really was a shift in our family system where like we became the family that we never thought that we would have had to go through that. And I think it was obviously very confusing and isolating, and I didn't really understand what was going on. And so I mean, I could talk about this forever, but that was sort of when it all began. I was a freshman in college when this happened. So I think it was really scary for my brother, but I think it was really scary for our family too. And this is just sort of when it began. And I remember he was struggling so much that I just remember worrying about him constantly, and not knowing what was going to happen. And just, I mean, to take the step to go to a wilderness program, it's a pretty extreme step, but what he was struggling with was like felt pretty extreme in that moment. I think just incredibly stressful and overwhelming and scary, which I'm sure many of the people in the room might relate to. Um, I won't go into this too much, but I did a timeline of my brother's experience with addiction because um I'll try to summarize it kind of quickly, but I'm sure some of you might relate to the sort of chronic nature of addiction, where he first went to treatment in 2015, and he did really well in treatment. He sort of completely transformed back to his old self. He was super happy. He was um interested in things again, like he started playing basketball again and all these different things. But of course, in the nature of addiction, he ended up beginning to struggle again in 2018, pretty severely with his mental health, and with his relationship with substances. And then he did really well in treatment again. He, came back to his old self when he was sober. He was living out in Oregon. He had started a rec basketball league for fellow people in recovery. He was um, starting church groups at the local church that he went to, helping other kids that were struggling with addiction. He was working full time, going to school full time, doing really well. And then he came home in 2020. And unfortunately, he came home to March of 2020 when he was sort of flourishing, but then, of course, the pandemic hit too. So I'm sure a lot of people might relate to that. And then I'm sure many of other people might relate to this, but he he relapsed in 2020 again, and in the midst of his relapse, he also got his girlfriend pregnant. So he was in active addiction, but he was also expecting his first child, which was a lot. But anyways, just give this timeline to express the chronic nature of the experience that my family's had, where things are okay for a little bit and then things go downhill and then things are okay and then things can go downhill. And I think that can really impact the sibling and the family system as well. Um, because it's such a continuous struggle. Once again, I could talk about this for 2 hours straight, all these different stories that my brother's gone through, but just to give sort of the nature of how it was years of struggle. So I just kind of wanted to highlight how addiction impacted my family system. I would say that there was a lot of emotional chaos and instability. My parents were constantly fighting all the time. I think it was a constant source of fighting, which, as I'm sure many people can relate to, being the child of people that are fighting constantly, I think it can cause a lot of emotional stress and a lot of guilt, feeling like, is part of this my fault? Um, Something else that my family went through was a big focus on my brother or the identified patient. So, sort of like we were all obsessed with him. We were obsessed with his struggles that he was going through. Is he okay? Is he sober? I remember just like a big trigger in my family system was like the smell of marijuana could just like cause a World War III fight of like insanity and chaos. And um, just like we were just sort of obsessed with making sure that he was okay. I feel as though my sister and I were overlooked in these and for honestly for years because the main focus was on my brother. My sister and I have had a few different big milestones in our lives where my brother's addiction and struggle with mental health sort of was the center of that. So when I graduated from college, the big focus was on the fact that my brother was getting out of treatment and was he going to be able to attend the graduation instead of kind of focusing on me, who was the one who had accomplished graduating from college. Many conversations were revolving around him. My sister got married in 2020 when my brother was actively relapsing. So something that was supposed to be sort of like the best day of her life, or one of the best days of her life, was really affected by his addiction and just kind of like feeling like it wasn't about us in that moment. And of course, because we're a family of 3 children, there should be moments when it's about him, of course, but it just felt like in big moments that might have been focused on us, the focus was on him and whether he was okay or whether he wasn't okay, just like a constant focus on that. One of the biggest effects that my brother's addiction had on my family is that my mother, who never really struggled with substance use at all, like maybe had a glass of wine once a month, grew to develop alcoholism because the stress of my brother's chronic struggle with addiction and mental health was so stressful to her. And I'm sure if there's mothers in the room, you can relate to the constant fear and stress that you're dealing with, being the mother of someone who struggles with addiction, and how she ended up leaning on substances to deal with her stress and anxiety, which of course spun out into chaos. So we had 2 family members who were struggling with addiction. I would say one of the biggest impacts that the addiction had on my family was also the joy that we used to have as a family. I feel like family dinners became sources of chaos and fighting and stress. I feel like moments of family, of having joy as a family, really weren't there anymore. I would say constant fear and panic about my brother's well-being, to the point of, we might get a phone call that's totally benign. I might get a phone call that is benign from my dad. He might be like, "Oh, your car, you should go get an oil change." But I'm thinking, did Robert relapse? Is he okay? Is he dead? I mean, just like constant panic and fear that affected all of us. I would say we were really focused on taking care of him and we're sacrificing our own well-being in order to promote his well-being, trying to support him. Anybody who's ever attended to be a part of the conversation parent support group, I'm sure you've learned that uh, differences between enabling and supporting, but I think sometimes we think that doing things for the person who's struggling is the best way to help them, and we sometimes sacrifice ourselves for the support of the person who's struggling with addiction, but that doesn't really help anyone. I'm sure, as people might have learned. And I would say my relationships with my sister and my mom and my dad were really fractured by the addiction in our family. I think My relationship with my brother was incredibly fractured, but I think it also impacted my relationships with other family members too, because we were all so upset and torn and emotionally drained by um, what was going on. And I think it's sad because we should have been supporting each other, but sometimes it's just you want to blame someone. And there are moments of, that have really fractured relationships. Um, I would say how my brother's addiction affected me. Move this up a little. Um, I felt like the family that I knew was lost. I feel like it's really sad to have a family that felt pretty stable and secure and have that fade into something that was really stressful and sad and just not really the family that I knew. I feel very lucky that I had such a stable childhood working with adolescents. I work with a lot of adolescents that have family systems that are pretty broken and pretty dysfunctional. So I feel very grateful that I had a family that was so really stable for the most part, but I feel like losing that was really painful. I felt overlooked and forgotten. I felt like I had to be perfect to balance out my brother's issues. So like I couldn't get in trouble because mom and dad were already dealing with so many other things, right? I felt like I need to achieve a lot. I think that's a side tangent, but I think in some ways my brother resented me because he was struggling so much and I was like perfect. I feel as though I became a pseudo therapist for my parents, probably most specifically my mother, which creates a very difficult family dynamic. It makes it difficult to have a parent child relationship. I worried about my brother all the time, which led me to struggle with my own mental health, feeling anxiety, feeling depressed, feeling sad. Um, I felt like it was my duty to save him from his addiction. I always say that if I could have chopped off my left arm to save my brother, I would have done it. But I went through enough times of struggling with what he was going through to realize that I couldn't save him by, sacrificing myself for his own well-being. He had to find ways to save himself. Um, I felt resentful of my brother and my parents for the decisions that they kept making. I felt a lot of resentment for my parents because they kept enabling him, and I felt like, I guess, as a not parent, I could see how they kept enabling his addiction, and I resented them for focusing on him more than they were focusing on me too. um I feel like I neglected friendships and family, extended family, because I was so focused on my brother. And I felt different from my friends because I feel like they didn't really understand what I was going through. um I mentioned this in the last slide, but sacrificing my own mental health and physical health for the sake of my family. Like I said, I feel like I would have done anything in the world to save my brother from what he was dealing with. But at times it was to the detriment of my own mental health. So I kind of just wanted to highlight from my story. I will share that my brother is doing a lot better now. And I think that has been a great source of healing for my family. He still struggles with addiction, but I think our family has found ways to support him in healthier ways and support each other with healthier ways. But I guess I just wanted, like I said, I could talk about this forever, but I to be more short, I wanted to share some insight into how parents could support the siblings of someone who has struggled with addiction, um, to learn from my own experiences, because I think if I had someone that could have shared some insight with me, I think it would have helped me avoid some pain, and maybe make some healthier choices. So a big thing that I think parents can do to help your children who have a sibling who are struggling with addiction, a big one would be to find supports for yourself, to avoid leaning on other children. So, for example, go to be a part of the conversation, parent support group meeting, maybe get coffee with a friend who was an adult, who can be more supportive to you possibly than your child, because it's a lot to lean on your children, as the sole source of support for what your family is going through. And I think it's just a lot healthier for the family system in general. Um, Go to Al-Anon groups, go to therapy, find someone who you can talk to who isn't your child. Um, I would say realize that your other children who aren't struggling with addiction have needs too, and they're not perfect. And help them have space to talk about what they're going through. And when I say what they're going through, I mean other things in their life. I think when I was in college, I might have been having a difficult semester, and I felt as though I couldn't really lean on my parents if I was struggling because my brother's struggles were so much bigger than mine. But I think if you have the ability, you could ask your child, I just want to take a moment to talk about you. Like how are you doing? Is there anything stressing you out? Maybe you have a 20-year-old who's struggling with addiction, but a 16-year-old who's stressed about soccer tryouts. And just because the addiction might seem like a bigger deal, and it is a bigger deal, and it feels more sort of life or death, I think still finding space to focus on your other children's like things that stress them out too, kind of honoring the fact that just because they're not addicted to a substance, it doesn't mean that they don't have challenges in life. Um, I would say try to connect your child with community groups like Al-Anon or Alateen. That can be, or maybe the be a part of the conversation group that will help them feel less alone. This is another one. Talk to them think about things other than their siblings. So maybe talk about who they're excited to go to prom with, or something that has nothing to do with their sibling. I would say finding family therapists if you have the resources and means to do so, who will include siblings in the conversation. The family therapy, I think, could be really helpful to highlight their experience, because, of course, addiction is a family disease, and it's impacting everyone in the family. So find family therapists who might help them feel included. While my brother has been in many treatment programs, I've actually never had the experience of being included in the family therapy. And I think it could be really helpful. I would say avoid triangulation. And if you don't know what triangulation is, it's when you tell, sorry to show the triangle, but maybe you'll try to talk to the addicted child through the other child to say, well, you should tell Mary this. Try to really avoid talking through other people and talk to the people in the family system directly. If that just try to make more direct communication, because triangulation can cause a lot of resentment and confusion. As difficult as this is, and I think if you have someone in your family system who is struggling with active addiction, it can be extremely difficult to do. But I would say try to find time to do joyful things with your family. Sometimes laughter can be very healing in the midst of really difficult, painful things. Making time to go see a movie as a family, or go on a walk, or do something that is outside of talking about the addiction that your family is dealing with, I think can create levity and help foster connection within the family system. And yeah, I think addiction can suck joy out of life. And I think sometimes we feel guilty for having joy if someone is struggling so much, but finding joy is actually helpful to them too. And finally, I will say acknowledge and respect that your child might need time to process the resentment they feel for their sibling. They might need time, and they might need time to process their resentment that they might have for you as well. But I really do think that, to give you some hope, I do think that with time, that resentment does fade. But just respect that it might take them more time than you wish that it is taking. So I'll end by saying to my fellow siblings, you matter, your well-being matters, and your struggles matter too. Sometimes doing the opposite of what our instinct is telling us is actually the right thing to do. And what I mean by that is sometimes we feel like by trying to save our sibling, that is the right thing to do. But sometimes the correct thing is actually to not enable them and help them realize that they are capable of taking care of themselves. I said, take care of yourself too. by trying to take care of yourself and your mental health, that actually is what's going to help your sibling the most. If you continue to sacrifice yourself to the point that you begin to flounder too, you're not helping your sibling. And like I mentioned before, that is so much easier said than done, but it is something that I would recommend. I would say focus on what you can control. You cannot control their choices. You cannot control whether they choose to use or whether they choose to do make bad choices. You can only control what you can control. I think having someone who struggles with addiction in your life is an incredibly painful and isolating experience, and something that has been the most healing for me is finding acceptance in the fact that I do have a sibling that struggles with addiction, and I have to accept him for who he is, and I cannot change that. He will be the one who will make that choice. Have boundaries with yourself, and not only with the person in your family who struggles with addiction, but also your family members. I always say to people who have siblings that struggle with addiction to ask themselves, what do I need? Because you're often so focused on what your sibling needs. And sometimes that can be as simple as, I really need to drink some water. I really need to go to bed early. I really need to call my friend and tell them what just happened. And I don't think it's a very natural reflex for the siblings of those who struggle with addiction. So I really try to hammer it into some of my clients who have that experience to ask yourself, what do I need? And also, it's okay to find joy in life. It's okay to have moments of feeling happy. It's okay to have fun. I think when you have a family member who struggles with addiction, you often forget that it's okay to have fun and you shouldn't feel guilty for having fun, for having joy. And You not being joyful is not going to help the person that is struggling with addiction. It's actually probably going to be worse, have more of a negative impact for them. So really try to find little moments of joy, and try to explore things that bring you joy and that are focused on what you like or what you want to do. And then I'll just end by saying, to my next slide, thank you for listening to me and my story. If you ever have any questions, you can email me at my email is maddie.omrad.therapy@gmail.com. I share this picture with my sister Emily because even though I didn't share a lot about her in my story, because like I said, it's a lot about the person who's struggling with addiction. My sister Emily is an incredibly wonderful person in my life. I think something that has really helped us is supporting each other and encouraging ourselves to take care of ourselves too, and kind of engage in all those behaviors that I mentioned, have boundaries with mom and dad, and just be supportive of each other and feel grateful that we have each other through this experience. So I wanted to end with that. But anyways, thank you for listening.
That's great, Maddie. So good. Beautiful job. I loved so much what you said. Hit on so many great points. I'm just putting the links in the chat that I promised to do earlier. I didn't want to interrupt you with that, but Kevin, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to you now, sir.
All right, all right. Well, welcome everybody. It's so great to be here. I'm just going to preface my remarks by just saying a couple things here very quickly. So I was just setting up here today, obviously for this seminar, this gathering that we have. And as I was setting up, I was actually seeing to my partner who I live with. I asked her, does my background look okay? Is this all right for this event? And she said, well, it kind of looks like you're being held hostage somewhere. So I'm just letting anybody out there who's looking at my background right now, I'm not being held hostage anywhere. I'm doing fine. I'm well. It's just the structure of my background in my apartment. So if that was one of your thoughts at the beginning of listening to me, let me just assuage those fears right now. I also just want to say again, and she's probably tired of hearing it, thank you to Kim Porter. Thank you to be a part of the conversation for making this topic a pivotal one, a pivotal focus of their organization. Thank you again so much, Kim. And the last thing I'll just say to you before I kick it off is all the remarks that I'm making here today, are me as an individual. I'm not making them on behalf of any other organization other than myself. And I just want to make that very clear. So I would say that in the beginning, too, that we really, my sibling in this case, I will not say his or her name, just because I would like to respect their privacy. But I would say in the beginning, when my sibling was born, we're about 5 years apart from one another. We grew up very close to one another, and we always felt that we could talk to each other about anything in particular. And then as I made the transition from high school into college, and then from college into my master's program, along the way, unfortunately, I lost several friends to substance use disorder. I lost a friend of mine in college that I knew, and I lost another friend who I knew as a child. And as I was sitting at those funerals, and as I was there, I was thinking to myself that I know that in the past that I have had members of my family that have struggled with substance use disorder, but I am thankful it has not touched my immediate family. And just a few months later, I unfortunately discovered, we all unfortunately discovered, that my sibling was abusing drugs and alcohol. And it sent me on a flurry, a roller coaster of emotions, as you can imagine. And the first immediate thought that I had was, why did they feel like they could not come to me? I felt that we were so close, and internally, I agonized over the fact that I had failed as a brother, as a sibling, um, that my sibling could not come to me. So that in and of itself, I felt like a failure. My sibling was sent away to treatment, and during that time, I began to experience the side effects of dealing with my sibling's substance use disorder. I noticed at work that there were moments where I would emotionally break down, and I became very familiar with our bathroom at work, running into the stalls and sitting on the stall and just crying. Again, feeling as if I have failed, I have let my sibling down, I have an open door with them. Why did they not come to me? And then not only at work, but also when I was driving. I vividly remember one time driving along 202 and having to pull over to the side of the road because I was such an emotional wreck over my sibling's substance use disorder. And then when the weekends would come, you would think there would be some alleviation. It's the weekend, you leave work behind, you go out with your friends, you go out, well, I isolated more than ever because I thought I don't want to go out and hang out with certain friends out of the fear that I would begin emotionally breaking down. And what do you do when you see somebody spontaneously or randomly crying that you know, or even people you don't know? You immediately rush up. What's wrong? What's going on? What's happening? What's this? What's that? And I was not able to explain to them because at the time my family said, we're keeping this very close knit, we're keeping it tight, we do not explain the truth about what happened, and that internally tore inside of me. And there were moments where I was very, very proud of my sibling. They reached, at one point, about a year of recovery. I began to feel very good. But as Maddie said in her presentation as well, I was also the subject of triangulation. And that is, ask them how they're doing, ask them this, ask them that. Or the opposite. I felt like all of the focus was placed on them, and all of the accomplishments and progress that I was making in life were put to the backside or to the back burner. I, at this time, completed my master's program for public administration. I felt that was overshadowed by what was happening in our life. And then I felt, even when my sibling hit about a year of sobriety, I felt that at that time, I feel good. My emotions are under control, they're in check. I'm not having, these episodes where I feel like I need to excuse myself. And then about a year in, a relapse came, and that triggered it and started it all over again. And I felt emotionally drained again. I felt emotionally hurt. And I felt that one of the support meetings that I was going to did not address enough the sibling experience, being placed into the middle of what was going on and what was happening. I felt that that was being completely ignored. But I really, during this time, actually, it's amazing, as I was listening to Natty's presentation, I, might have been excused or mistaken as a bobblehead because my head was just nodding up and down as she was just speaking. And there were a lot of things that Maddie suggested that I ended up implementing that helped me during this time. I, at one point or another, saw a therapist. I, at another point, also began even just journaling. You know, you will see in the amount of journaling, and I recommend this for anyone, not just even recommending for people who are going through the sibling experience, whatever you're going through in your life. When you journal, you'll have the physical proof in your hand of how much you progressed. And when you look at those pages, you'll say, life is not getting easier, I'm getting stronger. I've matured a lot. I've grown a lot. I've solidified myself against the challenges of life. And then eventually, my sibling, I'm very proud to say, uh, to this day now, to fast forward, has almost 10 years now in recovery. And I'm very happy to hear that. I'm very proud of them, unbelievably so. And even a few years into this epidemic of, not just hearing about my sibling, but other siblings, I really thought about starting a support network or a group that would address these issues that I had and a lot of other siblings had. And I remember in the beginning of starting it, I had, people say to me, what if this doesn't work? What if it doesn't happen? And I think that whatever we do in terms of be a part of the conversation or the group or anything in our life, we don't do it because it's going to be a success or we hope that 200 people turn out. We do it because it's right. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And that was the attitude that I felt when I started it. And I feel like the purpose of this group that I started, and Mallory Henry, who is on this call, was so gracious enough to combine forces with me later on. The purpose of this group, I felt, was to break the chain, to break the cycle, to break the stigma. And that's part of the reason why we're having conversations like this tonight. And I'll just conclude with this because I don't want to take too long. I want to get to your questions. I want to get to your comments. I want to get to what you have to say and what's on your mind. But I'll just conclude with this. When people say, why do you do this? Or why talk about this? Or what is the need to talk about this for? I'm reminded of a story, and bear with me if you've heard this before. There are two people on the side of a river, and they watch someone fall in. And one of them immediately jumps in and starts to rescue the one person and begins pulling them back ashore. And then another person on the other side of the river falls in. And then the other person who was originally there jumps in to save that person. And when they jump in, they start noticing that more and more people are falling in the river. And the people on the banks of the river jump in to form this chain to prevent people from continuing to fall in the river or fall down. And this chain keeps growing and growing, and people keep jumping into the river to prevent more people from falling in or falling downstream. And then eventually, one person leaves the chain. And then the other people panic and say, what are you doing? Why are you leaving the chain? What's going on? And that person said, because I'm going upstream. I'm walking up to find out why people are falling in the beginning. And if we can find out why, then we can stop this right now. We can break it. We can break the cycle at the beginning. We can end the stigma. We can end what's going on. And so I say to everyone out there, I'm not a leader. Nobody here should be deemed a leader. We are bred to be led. We're always looking for other people to do it. You are all on this call a leader. You all have the power to break the chain, to break the stigma. We all have the powers that person did to go up and find out why people are falling in. That's what I try to do. That's what Be a Part of the Conversation does. That's what Mallory Henry does. That's what Maddie does. It's what a lot of great people do. So I thank you again for inviting me here tonight, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, Kevin, I gotta take issue with one thing that you said. You are absolutely a leader, and you've done so. Yes, you are. Sorry, just take it. Just take it. You're an amazing individual, and I appreciate what you shared, and you've always shared beautifully. So thank you for that. You also had great stuff that you and thanks for that parable. Beautiful. I love the way you did that. And I also really appreciated that you brought up journaling, and I'm going to make sure that we get to everybody's questions. But I just wanted to say, I'm curious what you think, or what Maddie thinks, or Mallory even. What we do this exercise with our parents, because a lot of times, especially when we hear anger or resentment, which that's something that certainly is an emotion that seems to come from a lot of sibling experience, but parents feel it sometimes too, and one of the exercises that we often recommend is to write a letter that will never be delivered to our loved one, but it's a letter that we're going to write to our loved one's addiction, not to them, but to their addiction, to the disease that has caused all this havoc in the family. And it's pretty cathartic. I did it a couple of times with my son's addiction. And I'm just wondering, Kevin, if that's something that you've ever tried, or if you feel like that's a good fit for the sibling experience.
You're specifically referring to the process of writing a letter?
A letter to their addiction. Like
Yes.
and I should back up and say, like, the part of the purpose of this is because we're never going to give it to their child. It's not to say, look what you did. It's for us to help by doing that, recognize there's my loved one, in your case, a sibling, in my case, the child, and there's the disease that has, really captured them and hold our whole family hostage in a lot of ways. So we can make that distinction between the person we love, and the disease that we're angry with.
Yeah, no, I do think it is a useful exercise. It absolutely is. It is refreshing to physically see the feelings on paper, to see the feelings on paper. What I would advise too is, again, whether you're journaling or writing a letter, um, please come back to it. Please come back to it and view it. And what I find myself doing when I come back to what I wrote is I say, you've really, really grown as a human being. You've been through a lot. You acknowledge that you've gone through a lot. It doesn't define you as a human being, but it also has made you stronger as a human being. And so that's just refreshing to say on paper. It's one thing to say it, again, to physically see it, something else entirely.
Thank you. And without getting permission, I just made Mallory another part of our conversation. And so you, Maddie, anything that you want to add before we get to the questions that are being asked?
Yeah, I guess I would just say I think that that's a really powerful exercise. And I think another thing that is really healthy is to is to not judge yourself for having those feelings, because it's normal and it's healthy, and to, like you were mentioning with the letter, or Kevin was mentioning with journaling, finding ways to process those emotions, because if you keep holding on to those emotions, it's not going to be helpful to anyone. And I think a lot of people struggle with resentment for years. I mean, so, and obviously, like, I know they say resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, but it's really affecting us, the people that have resentment. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just add, well, thank you. And just amazing, Maddie and Kevin, as always. But Maddie, as you were talking, I was a bobblehead too. I was like, yes, that's the same experience. Yes, I know exactly what that's like. That's exactly how I felt. And, for Kevin too, doing this work a long time, but putting a voice to it is so powerful, because I think like both of them expressed, I know, like I have a brother who's has 9 years of continuous sobriety, had a relapse, and I think 7 years prior to that. And it was a similar experience in that I was not like brought to the table. Like there were sessions happening, but we weren't included, as siblings and things like that. So it kind of felt like your feelings aren't validated. And when no one's speaking it, you don't feel validated at all. So I think, as much as I wish there was like this is what you do to fix that, I think so much of it is just validation, because I think all of us can speak to like, that's the piece that was missing. And hearing that validation allows that self-compassion, because I think that's also what comes from like the journaling and things like that, is that I'm not a bad person for resenting my brother. I'm not a bad person because I feel jealous, or, two things can be true at the same time. I can wish my brother, I can know my brother needs more support than I do, but also be, and I can also be resentful and jealous that I wasn't getting, the attention and support that I also deserved. So I think all of those things are really powerful. But I just am always appreciative to Kevin for always being a voice for siblings, and Maddie, you too. Just thank you.
Thanks. Great. Well, we have some really good questions coming in. Can either, or we'll say any of you, speak on the steps and time frame to acceptance? Often as family or parents, we hope for a quick repair with relationships, and that can be challenging.
Yeah, I can speak. I mean, a lot of my work, because I do work for Karen and I do facilitate the family education program. So I get this question pretty much every week, of like, when is it going to get better? When did your relationship with your brother like succeed, become better? And when could you have like Christmas together and it wasn't like walking on eggshells? And I just think a piece of it, I think Maddie and Kevin both said, to like time, but then also like so much of it in hindsight, looking back, was doing my own work. Because I think the other end of it is like, I could sit there and I'd be resentful and bitter and, all these things, but I could come and, from the outside, it probably looked like we were having a great family dinner, but from the inside, none of us were joyful or content. And, I think what happened for me was my parents' validation and then allowing me to have my own process without giving me a timeline. I think, we also expect people in treatment to have a timeline, like, when are they going to get to amends? When are they going to get to step 10? And I'm always like, there's a reason it's 10 and not 1, right? Because like they have to be able to do the work before they can sit and have a conversation. So also the compassion for like the other children, that like it's their process and it might not be as quick as you hoped. I know one of the things, Kim, like you had a speaker, I want to say it was like 2 or 3 years ago. It was a therapist who was also talking on siblings in one of your recorded programs. And I was live and she said something that I had never heard before. And I think about it all the time. But she said, like, just because they're your sibling doesn't mean they need to be your best friend. And I was like harboring so much shame that like I didn't have this picture perfect sibling relationship. And when she said that, just that validation, I was like, oh, I'm never like, I love my brother and we can do things and wonderful things, but he's not my best friend. We don't have really anything in common aside from being genetically related. And that's okay. So also as like parents, like just not putting that expectation on your children that like they need to be best friends, knowing that you're raising different people as well, and to let them kind of do their process and not put an expectation on it. So just the validation of like, it's your timeline, it's your process, and I'll have some compassion for whatever timeline it is for you.
I think it helps too, with what is it from the parent perspective? Like we want Norman Rockwell, we want everybody to get along, and even forget the substance use piece of it. Like even when they're little and there's like a headbutting kind of a thing, we want to like defend. I did a lot of this, defend one child to the other, that kind of thing. And so that necessarily isn't a timeline, but it's not only working your own program, but it's working that muscle of like just practicing not jumping in, practicing taking it, like hearing that like I'm so sick of that behavior of my brother, sister, whoever, that kind of stuff, and just saying like, yeah, but you are. That's enough, like we don't have to say like, but don't you understand? Da, 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 da. And that's such a natural thing. We want the camaraderie and all that kind of stuff. And it's not ours. It's not our relationship to control at all. So all right, next question. Please share how you become aware of recovery, you become aware of recovery as a sibling. Did any of you attend meetings like Alateen?
I wouldn't say that I attended meetings like Alateen when my sibling was in the midst of substance use disorder. Um, what I will say that one of the things that's not discussed enough is we often think of recovery as when it is in a family member or a sibling that it only affects that one person. And I believe that the positive benefits of recovery spread to the other people around. And I'll give you an example of how I knew that my sibling was really in the midst of recovery. And I said, I know it, I can feel it, and it feels different this time. Is because my sibling was introduced to drugs by somebody that I believe actually used to come around our house. Um, and when I heard that my sibling was, uh, in the midst of substance use disorder, that was when I reacted as an older sibling and said, if I see this person, reflexively, and I'm ashamed to say I thought it now, my question to them will be, do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? That's how angry I was. But then when my sibling really was in the midst of um, their recovery and really following the steps, I realized that it was genuine because now when I watched my sibling, I now could feel something inside of me that I didn't feel all that time ago, and that was forgiveness. I I looked at this person that introduced my sibling and said, they didn't come into this world, and no one comes into this world wanting to addict other people to drugs and alcohol. No one thinks that. There was something that happened in this kid's life that put him down this path and took my sibling with him too. And that's where I knew the recovery was genuine for me because I said that awakened within me an enormous capacity for forgiveness. And when it did, it was not only a gift to him, it was a gift to myself too. Because the energy that I expended all this time hating this one individual, it was lifted, it was gone. And if I saw this kid or I see this kid today, I would say, I hope you're doing all right. I hope you're okay. I hope you're, whatever success you got going on in your life, I hope that it continues for you. That's how I knew in that moment it was genuine, at least for me, the recovery.
Yeah. I think for me, I kind of look at my family's experience with addiction as sort of like trial and error. And I think like the first time around, I didn't really get connected with like support groups for people that are going through struggling, having a family member who struggles with addiction. I think what really brought me into like getting connected with recovery meetings was specifically when my mom was in rehab and my brother was also in rehab at the same time. It sort of brought me to my knees. And so that's when I got connected with Al-Anon. And so I don't think you can force someone to get connected with recovery meetings, but I think you can expose them or like say, there's this Al-Anon meeting, it's at this time. Would you want to go together? Or I think also leading by example and saying like something that has really helped my family system is my mom going to be a part of the conversation meetings has really shifted her approach to my brother's addiction. And so watching her go to meetings and seeing how it benefited her encouraged me to get involved with meetings. But I think it can take a while for um both parents and siblings to realize like the benefit of recovery meetings. So I think you can't force them to go, but you can show them that the watering hole is there, you know. So yeah. But I think
Yeah.
it's incredibly helpful to just I was telling Kim this before, just sitting in an Al-Anon meeting and having someone say something that they went through with their qualifier. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I was the only person in the world who's ever had this experience, but there were like 10 people in the room who related. So yeah.
Yeah, I think to Maddie's point too, like the leading by example, I think for me, the first time around too with my brother, like I wasn't really involved. I was also, it seems to be a trend, like college, graduation. My brother was younger. And I was kind of like, well, I'm going to go live my life over here. And when he relapsed, we were in a family therapy session, and that was kind of the first time that I was brought in. And he said to us as a family, like, you guys thought that I was going to fix everything by getting sober, but you didn't do anything. None of you changed any behaviors. And that was like Maddie said, like to our knees, like, oh, like this isn't just like we play a role in this system. It isn't just like he gets fixed. And I think that's pretty common with substance use disorder in families, of like these family members have this thought of like, once they get better, we'll be fine. And then when that doesn't happen, it's kind of like, well, what's wrong with the system? And sometimes that is where we see a relapse too, because, you know, we fall back into the exact same patterns of enabling, not having boundaries, not taking care of ourselves, and then wonder why they fall back into the same, you know, patterns. And it was the same for me. Like I actually watched my brother go to meetings and have this support system and less shame and having vulnerability. And I was like, wait, what's that? Like how do I get that without having to have the whole like substance use disorder thing? Like, where do I get this vulnerability in a room? And that's what kind of led me, you know, like Kevin said, you know, was talking about therapy and, you know, doing all of that. And the therapist saying like, hey, that exists for you too. And I was like, what? Like, I had no concept that that existed. And then as working my way, you know, just kind of through quote unquote, like family recovery, meeting people like Kevin and Kim and all these people along the lines. And you start to see these inner connections of, you know, people who are willing to not sit in shame. And I think that's what's kind of led to the recovery. And for me, you know, I look at, you know, addiction runs in families. We hear that all the time. I think, you know, all the unhealthy coping skills run in families, the running from trauma, sadness, all these things. But the other thing that runs in families is healthy coping skills. So like, you know, if I can take that recovery and teach my kids, like, this is what we do when we're upset. It's okay to be bored. It's okay to be upset. You know, we're also continuing that into family systems too.
Two quotes I want to share with you. One is a friend of mine who's a therapist, who's a person in recovery, was talking to parents one night who've been impacted by substance use in their loved one. And she said, as the person with the addiction, she said, I can't remember what you can't forget. And that's just so true, that the like we that's trauma. Some of us have had some real serious trauma, like with our loved ones. And so how do you, even if our loved one is now sober, yay, that's amazing. But you know, we just don't know that we're going to actually heal everything that came along with all of that. So yeah, the work really is so essential. And of course we've all got that white knuckle syndrome where we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, which sometimes it does, you know, and how are we going to roll with that? Like, it's, well, I always like to remind people, when things are calm and they seem to be doing well, this is the time for us to really do the work. You know, when I can take a breath and focus on me, not to say I'm anticipating that things are going to get bad, but like stuff's going to come up for me. And, you know, so just want to share that. And then another quote is, a lot of you know Bill Roberts. He and his wife, Pam Roberts, his wife, is our parent partnership coordinator. They wrote this amazing, they compiled all these stories from parents, and it's called Standing in the Storm. And what Bill put in there was, when the house explodes, the parents run in and the siblings run out. And it's such a great analogy, I think, you know, or metaphor, I guess, of just like what that feels like. So the experiences are very different. And Maddie's right. We have a lot of resources, thankfully, for parents, which we didn't even have that before. But we do now. And the siblings, that's why we need to do this, because it's a different experience. It's a different set of emotions a lot of the time. And also the second part of that question, any recommended reading or daily readers for siblings that you've come across? Think there are a few potential authors right here on this panel.
I was just saying, I was like, as I was typing, sober siblings is like a decent starting point. I don't have one that I fully feel like truly like is great yet. But yeah, maybe we should collab, guys, because as I was writing that, I was like, I wish there was more resources specific to the sibling experience, aside from like your traditional kind of Al-Anon, you know, codependent no more, like all those kind of oldies but goodies. There's really not a lot of resources specific to the sibling experience, at least not that I know of.
Yeah, I know that one of the books that not necessarily having to do with siblings, but I have gone to it in the midst of, issues with sibling or even just, crises, family, my own life, Man's Search for Meaning. And that book was written by a Holocaust survivor. And he literally put a lot of different things he went into perspective and how it's applicable to our lives, trauma, stress, trials and tribulations. That is really one of the first ones I thought of immediately.
Mm.
But yeah, Mallory's right. There's really not a lot of literature on this subject, and ChatGPT can only write so much.
I would say this isn't specific to siblings, but I think learning about boundaries can be really helpful. Like books about boundaries can be really eye-opening. There's a book called Boundaries, but it is a Christian, does come from a Christian perspective. But I wish that there was a secular version of it because it's really, really helpful to understand like healthy boundaries and that it's okay to have boundaries and it doesn't make you a bad person. I feel like 5 years ago, I didn't even really understand what boundaries were, but I think it's a really helpful thing to learn about. Maybe even listening to podcast episodes about boundaries, different things like that. It's huge.
There's a really good book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace. I'll put it in the chat. It's by Nedra Glover Tawwab, and there's a workbook that goes with it. Love that resource in general. She does some really great stuff around boundaries because that's a great point, Maddie. I think especially for siblings, like I think like Kim said, like it's easy for us to sometimes disengage and like that is looked at as a boundary, but it's actually not a boundary. Like I think I was really good at being like, well, I'm just gonna like do my thing over here and that's my boundary, when that's not really a boundary. It was like a grasp at control, a manipulation tactic, all of the things. But I didn't know what a boundary was. So I'll put that in the chat because that's one I do really like too. That just kind of gives like some framework, which is really good.
Thank you both. Those are great. There's one that I came across that is also just okay, but I love the title. It's The Shadow Child. Which is such a great title to be about siblings. And they do get into other kinds of sibling relationships that might be challenging, such as a child that has a severe disability or something, where there just needs to be more attention and there can build some, resentment that you now feel shame about because they've got this, so it's a complex dynamic for sure. Thanks, Mallory. And someone, just to stay on that topic, said they believe that SMART family and friends, so SMART recovery is an evidence-based mutual aid group that's facilitated and all that, but they do have SMART recovery for the person with the substance use, but they do have these family and friends that this person mentioned, which is a helpful meeting for anyone wanting to learn coping skills. So thank you for that. Okay, does this include people who have lost siblings to addiction? I'm not sure what this is referring to, but I think perhaps the question is, do you have any, maybe Maddie, you've worked with some clients in this lane that have lost a sibling to an addiction, or if any of you has any perspective on this?
I think that a lot of this can apply to people who have lost siblings to addiction. I think that those resentments and struggles within the family dynamic might still remain. I just think the biggest thing I would say is just like allowing grief and allowing accepting that grief is a really complex process. So that's really what I would just say is like honoring that grief can take, I mean, grief might last a lifetime, grieving the loss of someone, losing someone to addiction. I don't personally I have not thankfully personally had that experience. But I do think that that's really important is the importance of holding space for grief.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would agree. I did see that question generated in the chat as we were beginning, and I thought it was in reference to our group, Mallory.
Mm.
And the answer to the question is yes, we have had people come through who have unfortunately lost a brother or a sister um, to substance use disorder, has overdosed and died. We have had that before. I personally have not lost a sibling to an overdose, but I have lost, I believe, 5 or 6 people in my life to drug and alcohol overdoses. And I don't know if the person who wrote that lost anyone. All I will share is I do remember, when that situation did happen. The story that I heard is, and I'm in no way trying to make a political statement here at all. The story that I was told is when Ethel Kennedy lost one of her children actually um, to a drug overdose. She was asked, "Does the holding leave inside of you? Does it ever go away, or does it ever get any smaller?" And she said, "It doesn't get any smaller, but your job is to grow yourself big around the hole." You have to take the best parts of that person and incorporate them into your life. And by doing that, the whole gets proportionately smaller. Um, and that's what I've tried to do every day. I think about all the people I lost and I try and think, what are the best parts of them that I can incorporate into my life to try and make the whole a little bit smaller.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I think the concept of like grief is just, I think it's just uncomfortable all the way around. I think I think for everyone, and no one really knows how to respond to it. I think that's one of the most challenging things about grief is like everyone's so uncomfortable and we aren't good with discomfort, just as humans. And I think grief is like Kevin said, we've had people come through the group. I'm just thinking like in the past couple months, we've had, a sibling who lost a parent. And while it's not their sibling, they've had to take on like a really big caregiver role in that sibling's life. And the vulnerability that she's able to come to the group and say like, hey, when you guys are talking about your parents, like that can be hard for me. And like, it's hard that I don't have that. But what I appreciate in that is like a vulnerable space where someone can feel seen and heard, even if they don't have the exact same experience as you. It's just like a safe space to be able to say, like, I was upset or that hurt my feelings. And, no one's going to put shame on them of be like, oh, well, could be worse, not trying to silver line a terrible experience. So, whatever group that is, like, I always say, like, in terms of groups, like, there's so many options out there and there's not a one size fits all for anything. So, it's like dating. You got to like try a bunch and decide what's right for you. But if you leave a group feeling worse or terrible or like that's not the right fit, then like you shouldn't leave feeling like I'm a terrible human being and I feel so much shame. You should leave feeling like, that was hard and uncomfortable, but I feel better for being uncomfortable and doing something hard. Like that should be the feeling. And to Kevin's point, I use the analogy all the time of like, you know, grief can look like loss. Grief can also look like a loss of expectation. So, like, this is what I thought my relationship would look like. This is what I thought my family would look like. This is what I thought my children's relationship would look like. And that is also a grieving process to not have what you expected life to look like. And that's what happens to a lot of us in families with substance use disorder. So, there's a grief model by Dr. Tonkin, which I think resonates here too. I use it all the time. It's like, a jar, and right now, especially if they're your loved ones in like active use or even like new recovery, it's like this ball is like shoved in this jar, and over time the ball doesn't get smaller, the jar just gets bigger. And I think that's the same concept of the Ethel Kennedy quote of like, it's I can't change, the trauma that I've experienced and my family's experienced and all these things, but I can at least take the empowerment and control, which is what I so wanted desperately in this situation with my brother and my family, to take control of what I can control, which is to take care of myself and allow myself to feel all the feelings and grow around it not changing anything, and having some compassion that like, even if I look back and think like that was terrible, I shouldn't have done that, or, I shouldn't have thought that way, is to have some compassion that like, no, those feelings were also valid. They were there to protect me in that time. And then I can feel empowered to find a therapist for myself who's going to help me walk through that grief, or find a group that's going to help me walk through that process and not feel as alone.
Beautiful. Thank you all. That's great. Someone had asked about where the sibling groups meets. It is virtual, and thank you, Maddie, for putting in there where they can find details on that follow-up page, the siblings page. Someone asked, what can you say to siblings or parents who are all adults, live in different places, where the adult child / sibling does not acknowledge the other child's addiction? It is different than when substance use disorder starts when they're young and growing up in the home versus later in life. So I think what we're saying is we've got, adult children that are grown, not necessarily together, and one is just not accepting that it's an issue.
I think that was my experience. So when my brother's substance use started, I was in college and I didn't live at home. So I lived somewhere else. I mean, it started obviously prior to that, but we really didn't know. And so I was not living at home. And my immediate response was to just not acknowledge, run out of that house as quick as I can. I'm like, I'm not coming home. I'm not doing this. I'm not calling. I'm busy. I'm traveling for Christmas. Like, my reasoning was to like escape and do that. But again, I think my parents let me to an extent. Like, I think, had enough support in their own parent support group, and, who are probably saying like, you can't make her, like, you're gonna have to like validate that she doesn't want to be, at home, and let her work her process. And, I remember my dad saying one time, like, hey, I've gone to these groups, they're really helpful, like, have you thought about that? Or have you thought about going to a therapist, and, I'll help you get connected. And I was, like, sure, I'll take you up on that. Like, if you want to do all the legwork, I'll show up and go. And that was the first experience I had with someone who was like, you can't fix it, you can't control it, but like, let's talk through how you can be okay. And you can potentially acknowledge it, even though it's uncomfortable. So I don't know if there's a way you can make them. But I guess my suggestion would be to say, like, to like Maddie's point, like, lead by example. Like, hey, I've been doing this and it's been really helpful. Or I've been doing therapy and it's been really helpful to process, this, instead of, I think it's really easy to get in that triangulation. If you aren't taking care of yourself in that time too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would concur with what Mallory said. I mean, you can't, we're active co-facilitators in our sibling group, but we also acknowledge you can't change your community, or you can't change the world unless you change yourself, and unless you focus on yourself. And sometimes being an example is enough to empower other people to go. I know friends that in my own personal circles that say you can't get them to go to the gym and take an active role in their health. But when they look at other people around them in their circle of friends, they're happy, they're healthier, they look great, they look awesome. Maybe I want to start going to the gym now. Maybe I want to start, waking up early or going after work to the gym. It's the same principle I feel that applies. When people go to groups, like be a part of the conversations or other groups, when they run into them and they go, they're happy, their mental health is improved, they're a part of the community, they're part of a group. Maybe I'd like to be a part of that. Maybe I'd like to join too. So at times, I agree. Maybe at times just being the example is the catalyst that starts the fire for change.
Yeah. Yeah, and something that I'll kind of say again is just like having direct communication about concerns is so huge, because you can't control how people react to what you say, but you can acknowledge something that's happening. Recently, one of my close friends, she had a situation where a family member was really struggling with addiction, but her parents weren't aware of it. And the adult lived not didn't live with her parents. And I just said to my friend, you can share with her parents what's happening. You can't control what they do about it, but you can directly speak truth to the fact of what's going on, because as we all know, addiction can like hide in the shadows, and actually directly say, or it's directly saying to someone, I think you're struggling. I feel like you have a problem with substances, and I if you want help, I want to help you get that help. Um, just like acknowledging things directly to the person that needs to hear it. You can't control the what happens after that, but at least you can speak truth.
Yeah, in the prevention world, we always say like speak in observable behaviors. Like
Yeah.
this is what I'm seeing, hearing, touching, whatever. It's not like, hey, I assume, or this again, it's uncomfortable, I think, to speak in observable behaviors because we're always worried about how the other person's going to react. But I love that concept, Maddie, of like just like laying the groundwork of like you can share what you're seeing and hearing, but you can't change the reaction. And if you go in with like an expectation of how they're going to react or change, like I think that's when we get ourselves in trouble. There's an AA saying there's always an AA saying for everything, which is annoying, but they're also wonderful. But the saying of expectations are resentments waiting to happen like resonates with me all the time because I'm like, it's so, especially uncommunicated expectations. And that's where like it's the resentment then of like them not doing what I want is mine to process, not someone else's. And that's the recovery talk.
Amazing. We have just a few minutes left. If anyone has another question, you can also, by the way, unmute and ask your question yourself or put it in the chat, however you prefer. Thank you all for sharing your experience, strength, and hope tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks to me. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Lee.
I hope that you all will share this recording once it's posted in a gentle way. You know what I'm saying? I have a feeling we have some parents on here who are going to say like, you have to watch this, and it's great to offer that, but you know what I mean? Maybe it's not a have to, maybe it's like, you might find this interesting. Do you know what I'm saying? I know that once we get this word out more about expanding the sibling partnership meetings, sibling support, that we're going to get that question a lot. How do I get my non-qualifier child to attend this meeting? Have you had that question before, Mallory and Kevin?
All the time. All the time. And I always say,
response?
like, you can't make them, you
Right.
can just share it with them. Like Maddie said, like, I'm going to share information with you. Hey, I was on this. You have a teachable moment right here. Like, I was on this, program and they mentioned this, like, just wanted you to know it exists. That's it. Not like you should go. Cause I think that immediately inputs like an expectation on both sides. And that's where the shame and guilt come in. So like just the sharing of resources. Hey, this exists. Just sharing it. Do what you want with it.
Right. Well, I cannot thank you enough. Any last thoughts, Maddie?
I would just say thank you, Kim, again. Thank you, Mallory, and thank you, Kevin. And I would just say my biggest takeaway from all of this is just find connection, find people to be there for you, because that can be the most healing thing of all. And addiction is such an isolating, lonely experience. And just finding people that can be there for you and listen to you is just the hugest thing. And honestly, tonight, I'm sure could be like one of those things of just realizing that you are not alone. Yeah.
Kevin, anything else?
No, I just have to say again, thank you for shining a light on this issue. And I salute the work that you are doing, that Maddie is doing, that Mallory is doing, and for anybody that is interested in the sibling support group, I believe that information has been posted. And I just can't give enough praise to Mallory for her role in the group as well. She is just an amazing co-facilitator, and she does such a great job. And I'm just really, really honored to be partnered with her on this.
Kevin, I mirror everything right back at you, Kevin. You've been doing this a long time, and you started digging the trench. I just hopped in there with you. So no, thank you. And to Kim, I mean, it's just an honor always to have a platform to share the experience of a sibling. So thank you for letting us be a part of the conversation.
Kind of our thing. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, everybody, all of you so very much. Thanks for being with us. Stay
Thanks,
cool.
everyone.
Mm.